год назад. Я записал свое первое обращение к рашистам, которые пытались штурмовать Киевщину. И вполне ожидаемо я получил огромное количество комментариев от русни, которая пыжилась, обещала взять Киев за 3 дня, всех убить и показать украинцам русский ад. И, конечно же, это оказалось обычным пиздежом, поскольку это единственное, что у русских получается делать хорошо. И поэтому я решил показать вам, как же на самом деле выглядит русский ад. А выглядит он приблизительно вот так. Вот эта вот внушительная свалка сожженной техники — это то, что осталось от элитных российских частей, которые пытались штурмовать Киев. И сама мякотка в том, что пока русня в комментариях пыжилась, кукарекала, угрожала, то вот в этих КАМАЗах, вот в этих Уралах, в этих БМДхах горели и умирали здоровые и крепкие русские мужики, молодые парни. Вот в этой всей технике превращались в пепел и умирали в мучениях. В то время, когда русня лгала о своем героическом отступлении из Гостомеля и Ирпеня, их лучшие солдаты гибли вот в такой вот технике от снарядов украинских защитников. И впоследствии мы собрали всю эту технику в одну огромную кучу. Конечно же, мы сошкребли с нее остатки вот этих вот элитных русских солдат и сбросили в одном месте, чтобы она не мешала нашим людям перемещаться по улице и ездить нашим автомобилем. Вот так вот и выглядит русский ад. Самый настоящий. Русский ад вернется в каждую российскую избу в черном пакете. И украинские защитники с радостью помогут этому осуществиться, как я и обещал год назад. И правда в том, что дети и внуки вот этих вот русских захватчиков, которые сгорели в этой технике, они никогда в жизни не будут считать своих отцов героями, потому что их дети и внуки будут до конца своих дней выплачивать Украине непосильные репарации за то, что сделали их папы и дедушки. И это был выбор русского народа. Они до конца своих дней будут проклинать своих родителей, которые вторглись в Украину и сдохли от украинского оружия, за ту судьбу, которую они уготовили своим детям и внукам. И самое интересное, что русские своим пердаком уже понемножечку начинают ощущать вот этот вот пиздец, который грядет в России уже очень-очень скоро. И ничего не получится отменить. Слава Украине!
Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to Overtime. We have Operator Starsky and Commander McMillan with us. Gentlemen, how are you?
Doing good.
I'm doing fine.
All right, and I got the wrong people in the wrong in the wrong places here, so I'm going to get that sorted in just a second. In the meantime, thank you all for joining us. We are simulcasting on In Time and Overtime. If you're on In Time and could join us on Overtime, that would really help out the channel. We are trying to get to 1,000 subs there as quickly as possible, so we would appreciate that. In Time is monetized, so if you have super chats, they're going to the Vatra Volunteer charity. All super chats, 100% of the super chats are going to that charity. So anyone who wants to donate, you do need to go back to In Time just to do that. In the meantime, yeah, sorry, it looks like only left channel on the audio. It's been a day, so I may work on that. Fire the producer. Well, as soon as we get one, we'll fire him. But in the meantime, we do have Operator Starsky here. So, Operator, why don't you tell us what's been going on in the last week in Ukraine?
In Ukraine, nothing changed. We still have a war with Russia, unfortunately. And yesterday, big list of help was announced for Ukraine. Actually, I have this list in front of me. So, British allies promised to send 14 tanks Challenger to 600 Brimstone missiles, 30 155mm self-propelled howitzers AS-90, 200 APCs and infantry fighting vehicles. Also, our Canadian friends promised to send us 200 Senator armored vehicles and one anti-air system NASAMS. Our Polish allies will send 14 tanks Leopard 2. And our American friends will bring us 100 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, 100 M113 APCs, 18 self-propelled M109 A6 artillery systems, 250 M1117 armored vehicles, 148 Humvees, 100 Striker APCs, also GLSDBs, those smart bombs. Also 36 105mm howitzers, one Patriot system, 6 NASAMS systems, 18 new HIMARS systems. Also, France will send us 40 wheeled tanks, so-called, we call them wheeled tanks, AMX-10, also armored vehicles Bastion. Our German friends will bring us 40 Marders, one Patriot system, 3 Iris-T, and 3 radio location systems as well, and so on. There's a lot of different things that will be brought by our friends in Netherlands and Czechia and Slovakia and Sweden, Italy and Estonia and yada yada. So we are expecting this support because we need to bring our territories back. And yesterday, Russians started offensive near Zaporizhzhia, which was a big fail according to our information, according to our footage. For example, yesterday, General Staff of Ukraine published a video of Russian soldiers advancing near Zaporizhzhia. Basically, they were just walking towards Ukrainians without any support of armored vehicles and things like that. And a lot of them were improved by Ukrainian fire. And the problem they're facing there is basically they don't have enough personnel to perform a successful offensive operation in this area, and probably they will never have that personnel. And of course, they lack their logistical support, which is not something new, right, for Russians. Also, the number of victims of this terrible strike in Dnipro rises. I think there were 44 dead people found. I think two days ago, and unfortunately, there were numerous kids among those victims, and there were different rumors about this. Again, in Russian media, Russians trying to, justify or find whatever reason, to justify the strike, basically. And some of them say that Ukrainian anti-air missile hit their missile and it fell on this house and yada yada. But the reality is the house was hit by 𝐒𝐸𝐴 Russian cruise missile that cannot be intercepted by our anti-air defense. And out of 210 𝐒𝐸𝐴 missiles that were fired at Ukraine, 0 were intercepted as of today. And basically, you can imagine the damage that was inflicted by those 210 missiles. Guys, it's a lot. I mean, imagine 210 cruise missiles that cannot be intercepted, hitting Ukrainian power facilities and critical infrastructure. It's crazy, and it happened all over Ukraine. And basically, we have information that this very missile apparently was targeting Naddniepryansk power station, but it missed and hit this house, because we know that those missiles are very, very non-precise. So there's still a bunch of people that were missing, right? They were not found yet. I think that obviously we will not be able to find them alive, unfortunately. So the search continues. And yeah, those are the news.
Yep, that pretty much echoes what I know. The what did you call it? 𝐒𝐸𝐴-22?
𝐒𝐲-22.
Okay.
𝐒𝐲-22.
Yeah, I think it's the one that we used to call the Sunburn, because it's actually an anti-shipping missile originally. Yeah, that is a wicked missile. It flies at a rate of about Mach 3 and has, not by design, it's actually a curious flaw in the targeting and stability systems. When it's flying, it's doing a corkscrew, which makes it even harder to intercept. So yeah, it's a very, very nasty missile.
Yeah. Also, 2 days ago, we had this tragic air crash. Our helicopter carrying our Minister of Interior together with his team crashed in Brovary, and it was a horrible news to all of us. I knew Mr. Minister, and in, God, was it April or May? In April or May, he was given me an award for defending Hostomel. Also on board there was a photographer, 𝐒𝐸𝐴𝐦𝐿𝐴, and
Oh, let's give him a minute.
and
Oh yeah.
yeah, and he served in the National Guard, and later he was transferred to Ministry of Interior. And that morning he went together with Minister and his team. They were planning this military trip to Donbass, And yes, unfortunately, they crashed in Brovary. Again, it's a big tragedy because a lot of innocent people died there as well, including children. It's horrible. And tomorrow there will be funeral. I think that I will be attending those funeral because I want to say goodbye to my friend and to minister as well.
Sorry.
Any word on what caused it?
So there was a malfunction in the helicopter. It was reported, as far as I know, it was reported and it was fixed. But I think that either they didn't fix it properly or something like that. Yeah, but it's a malfunction, basically, technical malfunction.
All right, so it wasn't struck down. At least there's no evidence that it was an enemy fire.
Hostile fire.
Nothing that I know of.
All right, well, Commander, do you have any questions?
Not specifically about any of that. The amount of material that's being transferred that has been announced is impressive. The one thing that, to my mind, still stands out as noteworthy is the, I won't call it lack because there are some, but the comparative dearth of tanks. And I think a tank is a key and essential element to conducting offensive operations on the modern battlefield. And while we're well aware that the Ukrainians have plenty of tanks, the 𝐒-𝐤𝐜𝐸 they had at the start of the war and the ones they've captured and such, I think if we're going to give them the tools they need to finish this job, it's going to have to at some point include tanks. There's a lot of debate going on, particularly with the Germans, about whether or not to transfer Leopards. And it extends beyond Germany. Basically, anybody who has Leopard tanks, in theory, cannot transfer those tanks without getting German permission. It's an end user list. So you can't transfer without the original owner or manufacturer country giving you permission to transfer that to a different country. So I'm curious how the Poles got that permission to transfer a small number of Leopards when everybody else seems to be stalled, and it may be the Poles basically just turned around and flipped the Germans off and said, no, we're transferring the tanks. So I don't know what's going on there, but I think that's the key. And I know there's a big summit that's may even be starting today or next week. I can't remember, but it's very soon, where I would predict that the transfer of tanks is going to be a major element of discussion. And I think a lot of pressure is being applied to the Germans to give approval. And at the same time, there's been a lot of speculation that the Germans are waiting for the U.S. to say, well, we're going to give them M1s, and that gives Germany sort of cover to transfer or allow the transfer of Leopards. And that then goes back to the question of, well, why hasn't the U.S. agreed to transfer M1s? And I don't know. I do know that there are some question about whether or not that's an appropriate system to give them, because it's a much more complicated system to maintain. It requires some more specialized operator training and such. And I think it would be certainly simpler on the Ukrainians if we could just say to countries who have Leopards, here, you give Ukraine the Leopards, we'll give you M1s as replacements. And that kind of balances the equation out and makes it simpler for the Ukrainians to maintain a stock of a single kind of tank rather than between AMX-10s, British Challengers, Leopard 2s, and M1s. You now have 4 very different systems which are not intercompatible, trying to maintain and operate all of those at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. And still, there's a lot of people that say that we either we don't need those tanks, or those tanks will be enough, or yada yada. Just for comparison, when this invasion started in Ukraine only had 800 active tanks, according to the reports of our general staff. And basically, we have a bit more. We have like 1,500 tanks in Ukraine. Big number of those tanks were being repaired and things like that. Some of them were meant to be sent to other countries and to be exported, basically. So as of now, we are talking about roughly 800 tanks. Russia had 10,000 tanks.
Yep.
And of course, more than 3,000 of those tanks were destroyed in Ukraine. So now they have around 6,000 tanks active, because we include this number that was captured on the battlefield.
Donated.
Yeah, land-leased by Russians.
Yes, exactly.
And we can talk about around 6,000 Russian tanks that they still have. So even though we are being sent all this help, we're still talking about a huge difference in those numbers. And of course, it's a big problem for Russians to deliver those tanks to Ukraine properly. And again, maintain them and find crew for each tank, and basically supply it with fuel and shells and things like that. But that's a big number, and we know that in case of Russians, they always rely on numbers. We remember that since World War II, nothing changed. Near Kharkiv, for example, during the World War II, when there was this offensive operation of the Soviet army, Russia had more tanks that could be theoretically destroyed. So when German troops were destroying tanks, such tank or two were already produced, and they were being delivered. So they rely on numbers. And for example, according to our calculations, Russians lost around 20,000 men dead near Soledar and Bakhmut as of today. And time to time, Russian trolls, post commentaries on my YouTube asking, so how is Soledar? And they are like, ha, guys, you lost 20,000 men.
Yeah, but at the same time, the Russian mindset has always been, who cares how many people die achieving the objective? And
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's the frightening part, is they just have bodies they can keep throwing into this meat grinder, and World War II is a perfect case of that. 16 million Russians died during the war, I think, on the front lines.
Yeah,
and
that
number boggles the mind. But to the Russians, it was like, yeah, okay, so what? We've got more.
Well, the Russian. Please, sorry.
Yeah, Russians have this saying that can be roughly translated as "women will make more."
Nice. Yeah, the Russians have a lot of sayings. Just like the wife is not a wall; she can be moved. We've spoken about this before, that the Russians don't seem to value the lives of their troops as much as, say, their equipment, which they obviously don't value very much either. So I want to talk real quick about the Jack-in-the-Box phenomenon, and Commander, you had talked to us about the ships and the fire control and other safety on board their ships. So Starsky, what is the Jack-in-the-Box phenomenon with the tanks?
Yeah, I think you told me about that.
So, McMillan, Commander, you want to take it away? The what is the Jack-in-the-Box phenomenon with the tanks?
I don't know exactly what you're referring to. If you're talking about the turrets flying off,
yeah.
Okay. So the issue there is that the ammunition in Soviet-designed tanks is stored inside the turret. So any hit on the tank tends to cook off all the ammunition, causing, you know, a giant explosion, and it flings the turret upwards into the air. You look at similar Western design tanks, and ammunition tends to be stored in a compartment to the rear of the turret. It's attached to the turret, but it's shielded by a sheet of armor and such, so that if the ammo cooks off, the explosive force is vented to the rear and doesn't go into the vehicle itself, killing the crew. And that's the different design philosophy.
Now, you had suggested that actually this sounds like a terrible design, right? I mean, you hit the tank just right. I mean, it's great for Ukraine. You know, you hit the tank just right, boom, the top pops off, and you've killed the crew instantly. But you had suggested earlier that this is actually almost considered a feature, because with the top, you can just remount the thing and replace the crew, and you still got the equipment. Is that roughly accurate?
If you have possession of the battlefield, so you can salvage stuff, you can hook up and tow the hull of the tank away, clean it up, do repairs on the engine block and everything if it's damaged, and just put a new turret right back on top, and ta-da, you have a functional tank. That's part of a design philosophy to some extent. Whether it's a valid philosophy, not just talking in terms of the numbers of people who are expendable by saying, oh yeah, well, they got killed when their tank blew up, so what? It's also questionable in terms of, does that explosive force, when the ammunition detonates, leave the interior of the hull functional enough that you can restore it to operation? So there are gradations of whether or not that's an effective design feature or not.
And you had talked to us about their ships too, which you had said basically the way they were designed, one hit and it's considered a complete loss. They don't actually worry about the survivability.
I don't know if that's design. All I know is when I did an exercise with the Russian Navy shortly after the wall came down, and they had 3 of their ships that came to Pearl Harbor. We did this little exercise, and one of the things they allowed, which stunned everybody, but they were allowing people to come and tour their ships. You were just only allowed to walk around topside. You couldn't go inside. But one of the things that I and several of the other U.S. Navy officers who were there noticed is that if you're on a U.S. Navy ship and you're looking around the outside or on the inside, there is a firefighting station about every 20 to 30 feet. They're everywhere. And this was at the time, fairly brand new, top of the line Soviet guided missile destroyer. There were on the topside spaces 2 and only 2 firefighting stations, and one of those was actually a fixed foam spraying nozzle that was above the helo deck in case you had a helo crash on the flight deck. So Our assessment was, if you hit this ship, it's going to burn to the waterline. They really don't have the capability to put out fires. And when you think about it and you look at their missile systems, it kind of made sense, because for their ships to reload missiles, you have to go back to port. And the idea was, we figured, is you set sail, you deliver your ordnance, and what happens after that is, well, if you're lucky, you get to come home and we can reload and use you again. But if you get sunk, so what? You did your mission, which is fire off missiles at, at Western ships, presumably U.S. carriers. That was the presumed philosophy behind those design elements.
Right, so
again,
question,
it's that callous, who gives a damn what happens to the crew?
Commander, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I noticed this fundamental difference regarding Russian fleet, the difference between Russian and American fleet. And the difference is Russian ships usually carry much more weapons. For example, Russian steam carrier, Admiral Kuznetsov.
𝐒𝐢𝐬𝐜𝐿.
Well, it's not even considered an aircraft carrier. Basically, it's considered, according to Russian terminology, it's considered aircraft carrying cruiser, because it has.
Do you know the
missiles.
reason behind that? It's because
I'd like to know.
Yeah, it's because of the Montreux Convention, which is that in order to transit the straits, the Turkish straits, the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, you cannot have a ship that is larger than a, quote, cruiser, unquote. So if you call it an aircraft carrier, it basically gets stuck in the Black Sea and can never leave because of this international treaty. So what you do is you redesignate it with an imaginary, it's an aircraft carrying cruiser title, and now it can legally exit the Black Sea. That's the philosophy behind that. But yeah, Starsky's exactly right. If you look at a Russian ship, they're very, very heavily armed with offensive equipment, much less so defensive equipment. You look at American ships, and I would argue pretty much any NATO ship, they're fairly well equipped defensively, not hugely so offensively. I mean, they do carry offensive ordnance, but it's in terms of proportionality, let's say a Russian ship is 2/3 offensive armament, 1/3 defensive armament. The flip side of that would be a U.S. slant NATO ship would be 1/3 offense, 2/3 defense.
Yeah, because like if you take, for example, Perry frigate, right?
Yeah.
It has, this machine gun, automatic.
Yeah, it has basically 3 systems on it.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It has
automatic
in the back.
machine
It has
gun, torpedoes, and missiles.
Yeah. So it has
one missile system.
Yeah, it has one missile launcher up forward, which is predominantly used for anti-aircraft, anti-missile defense. It does have the capability of firing Harpoon anti-shipping missiles, but it doesn't typically carry lots of those in the magazine. So it's a fairly limited inventory that you can project out to sink enemy ships. You have a small 3-inch gun midships. Arguably, that's primarily a weapon to be used against inbound missiles, not so much shooting enemy ships. You can use it that way, but it's primarily an anti-aircraft, small craft defense system. You have on the back end, just above the helicopter hangar, you'll have a 𝐒𝐢𝐬𝐿, which is basically a Gatling gun used for shooting down inbound missiles. And then you have anti-submarine torpedoes. That's it. A comparable Russian ship is going to have, take a Krivac frigate. You've got 4 very large dual-purpose anti-ship, anti-submarine missiles. You've got 2 100-millimeter guns. You've got various air defense automatic cannons. You've got lots of torpedo systems. You've also got these little mini depth charge throwers. It's bristling with weapons. And you can see the design philosophy differences. Theirs tend to be more offensively oriented. Ours tend to be more defensively oriented. It's hard to say whether that's the right philosophy, but for their purposes and the mission that they intend for the Navy, it does what they want it to do. Our Navy was always intended to secure the sea lines of communication between CONUS and Europe, so we could transport reinforcements for the big, battle in Central Europe when the Third World War started, and to a lesser extent to protect carrier groups that would go up in the north and launch attacks against northern Russia. So that's primarily a defensive focus. The Russian focus was just the opposite, was to send their ships out and sink those carriers before they could launch those airstrikes on the homeland, and to go out and sink the convoys that were bringing the reinforcements to Europe. So whether those ships survived or not was of far less importance to them than whether or not they succeeded in employing or taking out U.S. and NATO ships.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sense?
Because absolutely, I'm just comparing to Russian cruiser type Admiral Gorshkov, which carries one 130 millimeter naval gun, 16 cells for caliber Onyx or Zircon anti-ship cruise missiles, or 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐿 type anti-submarine missile, 32 cells for, again, cruise missiles, 32 cells for surface-to-air missiles, 2 rotary cannons, 2 torpedo tubes, and I'm not even mentioning the helicopter, and I'm not even mentioning depth charges and things like that. It's crazy.
Well, it's what you design your fleet to accomplish in a war, and the design / doctrinal philosophies behind those fleets, within the context of the missions that the senior staff is envisioning for those fleets. Both sets of fleets make sense. But there's a certain degree of, I think, built-in callousness on the Soviet/Russian design philosophy, which is that the ships and the crews in them are expendable.
Yeah. It's like putting cruise missiles, like caliber cruise missiles, on board of a frigate, it's a
yeah, exactly.
insanity.
So, given there's been sort of this ongoing discussion, what is the purpose of the aid that is being given to Ukraine? Is it to help Ukraine defend itself and ultimately, quote, win, whatever that looks like, certainly at a minimum, hopefully get Russian forces out of the areas that they've invaded? Or is it to just delay and keep things going enough until either there's a negotiation or something else happens? And given the amount of forces that Russia seems to be willing to just keep throwing at Ukraine, no matter what Ukraine has, is Ukraine getting enough weapons? Is it getting enough weapons to accomplish its goal? And what is the consensus of each of you as to whether or not, we'll assume that it's going to keep getting sort of roughly the same stream that it's been getting. Does Ukraine still need even more weapons to really expel the Russians, or would more weapons not necessarily help because of the imbalance of the quantities of people that Ukraine has to man the weapons versus the Russians, which is what, at least an order of magnitude more. I'll start with Starsky.
Yeah, so we are not getting enough weapons. If we're talking about anti-air systems, again, Ukraine has 25 regions. Three of them are currently occupied by Russians, and it means that there's 25 major cities in Ukraine. We need at least 25 anti-air systems, because Ukraine is huge. Every region is the size of I don't know. Some of them are bigger than some specific states in the U.S. And we need to protect those territories, and that's why we need at least 25 anti-air systems. And it's not like it will be enough. I'm talking at least 25 anti-air systems like IRIS-T or NASAMS, capable of destroying cruise missiles. And as for the offensive weapons and offensive vehicles, of course we need more, because again, Russians had 10,000 tanks. Currently, we're talking about roughly 6,000-7,000 tanks that they can use on a battlefield, and of course they can throw it all at Ukraine, because they don't care. They already bet everything on this suicidal special operation, and we need enough weapons and tanks to be able to, first of all, be able to defend against their invasion, their offensive operations, and then we need enough weapons and tanks to be able to liberate our territories and eliminate as much of their personnel as they can. That's our task number one. So they're throwing their, let's say, their main weapon that is being used on the battlefield is amount of men and tanks. That's why we gotta have capabilities to eliminate their tanks and men, basically. So in my opinion, and I'm sure that this opinion is shared by every Ukrainian, we're not getting enough of this military assistance, but we are doing everything we can with everything we have. And I think that you can see from our successful offensives in Kherson and Kharkiv that if we have enough, let's say, vehicles, right? Vehicles and proper weaponry, we can do it successfully.
All right, thank you. Commander.
It's a really tough question, and I think it needs to be answered in two separate ways. Are we giving Ukraine enough support for Ukraine to achieve its objective of driving the Russians from their homeland? I would contend, no, we're not. We're giving Ukraine enough hardware to prevent the Russians from succeeding in taking the whole place. If we want to give them enough to reclaim their homeland, we need to give them more, and we need to give them more in specific types. Most notably at this point, more artillery, not just enough systems to replace losses, but to give them an artillery edge of significant proportions. Probably air power. I know there's some discussion about doing some of that, giving them more air power, but unlike a tank or an artillery system, the lead time for getting air power deployed into the field is fairly long. It probably takes a minimum of a year to get new pilots into those planes and get them trained up to a point where they can perform well in the air. So that's a long-term goal. You can kind of, to a limited extent, sidestep that by getting former Russian Soviet-type aircraft, which Ukrainian Air Force personnel are already somewhat familiar with, as opposed to giving them, U.S. or European-made aircraft. But sourcing those is problematic. So from that perspective, I think Ukraine feels a justifiable sense of frustration that we're not doing enough to help them.
Mm-hmm.
From the Western perspective, and take this for what it is, Starsky, I'm not trying to denigrate your country. From a Western perspective, we're doing, or I think the politicians, I should say, are doing what they think is right, which is giving Ukraine enough to defend itself, but not enough to threaten Russia to the point where they do something completely wacko, something rash. And I think that's one of the reasons people are so reluctant to give Ukraine the tools it needs to achieve a decisive victory, is because there is concern that once that victory starts to roll into place, as Ukrainian forces start driving the Russians out of significant portions of their territory, that something will happen inside Russia that quickly escalates this beyond just the borders of Ukraine. And so there's caution is ruling a lot of minds. I think people are starting to realize, however, at least some governments are starting to realize, that if you don't take fairly decisive action soon, that you're kind of setting the stage for the Russians to say, well, we can continue grinding this war on for as long as we need to. We could even risk it, expanding it, because it's clear that NATO is not willing to stand up and do what's necessary to stop us. So it's a two-edged sword, and I think people are beginning to realize that one of those sides to that sword is very dull and probably needs to be sharpened. That's how I assess the current situation in terms of, are we doing enough? Does that make sense?
Does to me. So, all right. I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. I had to switch mics. There's an issue. I don't know what it is. I have one other thing I would like to talk about before we do that. Please come join us on the Discord. We are following all of this on the Discord. We have multiple news channels. We collate news in the U.S., news abroad, and specifically a channel just for Ukraine. So come on in and check that out. You can see what we do. We're largely my brain is still in neutral. We are largely community driven, so our community helps determine the content that we do and the direction we go in, and we're very proud of that. So hoping you guys will come join us. Also, please, there should be a link if you're watching us on In Time. There's a link to the Overtime channel, which is our new sort of sister channel. A lot of our content is going to be going to that. If you could go to that and subscribe, like and subscribe, that's going to really help us out. We're trying to get that to 1,000, and that's just a favor that we are asking. Liking, subscribing, and sharing if you like the content really does help a channel out, helps us out. And before I get on to our final thing, I would like to take a minute to thank the shills in general, and Dick Dawson in particular, who has been very helpful with the audio. The audio problems we're experiencing right now, not his fault. I would like to blame him. Going forward in the future, I will blame him. It doesn't matter whether it's his fault or not. refuse to take responsibility for the difficulties in my own shell. So we'll be blaming him in the future, and hopefully he doesn't know how to clip YouTube shorts. He probably does, so I'll be screwed. But he's been helping us out with that, so I wanted to just give a shout out and thank. And you will be joining the shills tomorrow, will you not? I think 3 p.m. Eastern, is that correct?
Yes, it's correct. I will be joining Shills, and we will discuss what happened in Ukraine in the last week, and our plans, probably some personal questions, things like that.
All right. Well, and hopefully I will be able to be there. They have invited me. That does remind. Oh, all right. So we actually now have another question that we're going to be adding. So one thing at a time. Yes, I will try. I will try to be there. We have breaking news. The U.S. has designated the Wagner military group as an international criminal organization. That has just come out, and I wanted to ask Commander McMillan. The Wagner group, last time we talked, was moving to take control of the entire Russian military. Last time we spoke. What's going on with that right now?
I can't speak to that in a lot of detail. It's just rumors that are coming out, and obviously the Russians are doing a good job of keeping the information flow coming out of their country squashed. The concern, I think, that would be on Putin's part is that giving I can't remember his name, promotion or something like that, the head of Wagner, giving him control of the ground forces of the regular army makes him way too powerful and puts him in a very strong position to stage his own coup and take over for himself. He may be asking for it, and there may be certain factions in the Duma who are arguing for it, certain oligarchs who want to use him as their strongman. But I doubt it's likely to happen. They have been one of the primary forces that have been conducting the assaults in Bakhmut and Soledar, and in a large part, it's because they have access to those prison populations. And you can send convicts out and have them die in, tens of thousands. And not only do you not care, because you have no relationship with these people, but honestly, the bulk of the Russian people don't care and probably see it as a good thing of getting rid of undesirable elements. So they'll just keep pushing like that as long as they have that manpower pool to tap into.
And Putin's been committing genocide in that sense as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
Drawing from less ethnically Russian populations to throw into the military. If they win, great, he gets Ukraine. If they lose, great, he's wiped out a whole segment of what he considers to be non-pure Russian. Is that correct?
That's true. Yeah, that pool is getting shallower, so they're having trouble solely tapping into those elements or predominantly tapping into those elements for manpower needs. They're starting to have to go to both the rural and urban populations in different amounts to resupply the numbers in the military. But they're definitely an aspect of if Kazakhs or Uzbeks or whoever who are living inside Russia are dying on the front, the average Russian probably says, well, so what? Big deal. Who cares? As long as it's not Russians who are dying.
All right.
Designating.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes. Please, Starsky.
Yes. So the main let's say, reward for those Wagnerites is that basically they are released from all the accusations and things like that. And there was this very funny story in 𝐓𝐢𝐜𝐻𝐿, in the city of 𝐓𝐢𝐜𝐻 in Russia. There was a Russian convict that got enlisted. He applied to Wagner. He was killed in Ukraine. And funny thing that this dude was convicted for being a pedophile. And of course, he was released from all the accusations, and he was buried in 𝐓𝐢𝐜𝐻. And because he was buried as a hero, here I have this picture, not, like you will not see it probably. So because he was buried honorably as a Russian soldier, they put children holding weapons, holding AKs, near this grave, as you know, the honorable.
Oh, brother.
Yeah, it's
Creepy.
and it happened everywhere. But I think that it was a genius decision to enlist, to recruit convicts. It was genius, literally. And I think so far they already lost, got rid of around 30,000 convicts in Russia.
Well, and they're shooting their own military. These guys too. They're not well trained. They have low temp. There's a reason they're in jail. Giving them a gun, even if you're aiming, forcing them in the direction of the enemy, giving them a gun may not be the brightest idea. At least now what we're seeing, friendly fire incidents have gone through the roof.
Well,
Yeah,
that plus the fact that we're finding out that in many cases, convict soldiers are only given, like, one or two bullets to go with their weapons when they're sent forward. They're not there to fight. They're there to find out where the Ukrainian army isn't shooting back. And if they can get to a position, then they can try to hold it while reinforcements flow in. That's the whole idea.
Yes. Commander is right. Mostly Wagnerites are used, specifically those convicts, mostly they're used for so-called reconnaissance by combat. Reconnaissance by combat was invented by Russians, and they use it a lot. It's not like reconnaissance, like when you send some highly trained personnel to find positions and stationary machine guns and tanks and things like that. No, it's like when you throw men at the positions of your enemies, and when your enemy starts eliminating those men, then they uncover their positions for their stationary machine guns and tanks and yada yada. So it's easier, it's faster, and man, nobody cares about them. Women will make more. So this is what they do, and the situation between Wagnerites and their professional army in general is that Wagnerites have this authority to be rather autonomous. They don't always cooperate with military personnel. They don't always report what they do and things like that. They have kind of more authority in this regard. And that's why Russian army hates them, basically. And there were numerous interceptions. You can find them on YouTube, those recent ones where Wagnerites are nagging about Russian army command that doesn't give them artillery shells. So that's the thing. And Prigozhin, I think last week Prigozhin went to Moscow to talk to Putin because of that, because of this kind of difficult situation, complicated situation. That's the word. I think Putin will stick to his army, not Prigozhin, because Prigozhin cannot be controlled as much as army, right? And because he's less controlled than army, Putin will stick to his military command, like oh my god, the last dude that was assigned 𝐒𝐤𝐜𝐴.
Я не
The
знаю, я
latest
забыл.
commander.
Извините, я забыл.
Oh my god. Yeah, so that the dude who replaced 𝐒𝐤𝐜𝐴. Why it happened? Basically, it happened because Putin doesn't have enough trust in Wagnerites. I mean, they will be used as a private military company. They will, in case of such, in case they have this need, they will completely get rid of them because nobody cares.
Let me interject just so that the audience understands. The idea of giving Wagner Group control over the Russian forces in the area would be the equivalent of the U.S. Army giving Blackwater control over all U.S. forces deployed in, say, Iraq or Afghanistan when we were doing those campaigns. And then add in the political element where you realize Eric Prince, who owns the Blackwater Corporation, its name has changed, but I still call it Blackwater, is an extreme right-winger and has supported all sorts of anti-U.S. government activities. And so you're basically handing the reins of control of the military over to a guy who is almost a self-declared enemy of the government. It makes no sense to do it. You might have a use for them to be there and perform certain specific functions, but you sure as hell don't want to give them control.
Absolutely, and even Kadyrovites are more controlled than Wagnerites, basically because they are professional military. Again, they have their specific task, which is create a lot of TikTok videos to entertain us.
Well, somebody has to.
Of course. I love all of those videos. I think they were made unintentionally, but there's a lot of those, when they walk and talk about something, and then suddenly they die because of shell or something like that. They have a lot of those. I think that's their best content ever.
Okay. So this is a great segue into a question I was asking you before we actually came online. We know that many of the Russian elite formations like VDV, naval infantry, those kind of forces, Spetsnaz, suffered horrendously high casualties in the opening months of the war. And most of those units were withdrawn from the front line for reconstitution. Have they returned to the front lines?
Yes, currently we know that in the area of Bakhmut, there are Russian VDV paratroopers involved into this offensive operation. There's a lot of them. We know that the situation changed big time. They relocated most of their Wagnerites to Solidar. And in Bakhmut, we noticed the change in this, in the way they are performing their offensive operations. So they are involved, but again, because elite died during the first month of this invasion, their quality is different. The tendency is that they will have more men with less and less quality.
Mm-hmm.
So
they're kind of right now at the training level of what used to be regular army, And the regular army has been reconstituted with all the MOBICs and such, and they're much worse off than they were originally, is kind of what you're saying, it sounds like.
Yes, and they, of course, they have plenty of veterans of, let's say, Chechen War, but those veterans will still have to learn new things in accordance to new field manuals, new SOPs that Russian army has as of today. Again, they kind of do. They still use old World War II tactics, but let's say they do. But again, a lot of things changed in the Russian army since 2000s, and new weaponry was implemented. So they will still have to learn all that, master new vehicles, master new tactics, and a lot of old school soldiers, a lot of those old school veterans, they kind of they're very hard to integrate into this new army. So because of the because they lack of this cooperation, they will have a lot of issues, and they already do. I mean, it's not a secret.
Yeah, makes sense.
So for those of you who didn't catch this earlier or just joining us, the U.S. has just designated the Wagner military group, the Russian Wagner. I don't know if that's a separate from but an international criminal organization. So thanks, Judgezilla, for that. We appreciate it. I appreciate you passing that on. We have a question from the live chat as well that I want to hit. What are the international implications of using international terrorists as, and they are considered by a great many people terrorists. I think the UN, if I recall, was considering it a war crime to use that group to fight the in the military. We'll start again, Starsky first, and then Commander McMillan, if you have any thoughts on the use of Wagner Group in general.
Currently, let's put it this way: physically, and at this point, it's not gonna change anything much. But eventually, when Russian terrorists will start being captured, it's my personal opinion. They start being captured and face international trials and things like that. This will be important. But I'm very, let's say, skeptical regarding the UN, especially their Security Council in general.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the designation by the U.S. of them being a criminal organization, or by the UN of them being terrorist organization, really isn't going to change a damn thing on the ground. The Russians will continue using them simply because they're achieving results. That's all they care about, is our results being achieved. Let's do it. The moment having them working with their military becomes a liability, they'll stop using them. But right now, there's no reason not to use them.
All right, and then I had
absolutely. And from what I know, in Serbia, I think activists were trying to sue Wagner because they were recruiting people in Serbia. It was recently, like a couple of days ago. So this can, let's say, this can be helpful in this regard. In case some of Wagner's recruiters get arrested and things like that. Currently, the world is preparing this international trial, the foundation for this international trial, upcoming trial over Russian terrorists and Russian criminals. I cannot say that it's not important. It's not going to change much right now, but it's still important for the future, because we must do everything to bring those terrorists to the court and make them face justice.
All right, and then I had a question for you, Starsky. Can you identify the men in this photo, please?
Yeah, so the man on the left looks like me.
Does look familiar? Yeah, I recognize the little mischievous. You know, he's not wearing the hoodie, but okay. Yep.
Yeah. And if I was his, let's say, if I was his sergeant, I would punish him for not wearing his patches. The dude in the middle is my good buddy, cameraman. People who follow me from the beginning probably know about this man. He was behind the camera all the time. And the man on the right is Max. He's my number 2 press officer in my brigade, and my number 1 friend in this brigade. Currently, he is operating in Bakhmut. He has been to Hostomel a couple of days ago, just for the New Year, holidays, took a small vacation, and now he's returned to Bakhmut, and he has a YouTube channel called The Flashback. I highly advised to subscribe to his channel, because he brings stories of actual soldiers, and he brings a lot of footage to his viewers, actual footage from what happens in Bakhmut at this point.
And we'll put that in the description. So hopefully before the end of the day, that'll be in the description. I don't think we'll be able to get that in the live chat in time, but we'll put that in the description. So you've been following Max a bit now. Didn't he have a story sort of recently where he was missing for a while, if I recall?
I think the recent story he published was about a reconnaissance guy. Mm-hmm. Guys, you gotta check all of his stories. They are all incredible. There are stories that are told by our tankers, our recon boys, our medics, and volunteers, and different people fighting for Ukraine.
All right, we'll have to reach out to him. I've seen some of his footage, but I haven't been able to. But I've seen his channel, and it's I've enjoyed what I've seen. So we'll reach out to him and oh dear Lord, I was going to get the two of you on together, but that may be too much. That if you're both friends, just end up being the shenanigans will be uncontrollable. Even the dog. You see, even the dog knows. It's. I think we've. All right. Well, so we have a link to Starsky's channel down at the bottom. So I hope everyone will subscribe to that. We will also add a link to Max's channel. Again, if you're watching this on In Time, we have 2 channels, In Time and the new Overtime channel. We are trying to grow that channel. We need it to hit 1,000 subs as quickly as possible. Then we can put all our content. Half our content is going to go on that. So if you're watching this on In Time and could mosey on over to Overtime, there is a pinned comment at the top of the chat, and it should also be in the top of the description. Just head on over there, and that would really help us out. Also, like, subscribe, and if you like the content, share it. That helps us out a lot. We have a Discord. Come join us on the Discord and see what's going on, how we do what we do, and you can also contribute to the show. We have a lot of volunteers, and we go over a lot of news every day. And we sort through what we put on air and what we don't for our regular rundowns and breaking news. So come on in and be a part of the show. Commander McMillan, any final thoughts before we go?
No, not really. I appreciate having me on. I'm sorry for the unruly puppies there at the end.
No worries. Mine was going off earlier too, and in terms of it's the least of the unexpected things that happened in production today. Operator Starsky, any final thoughts before we go?
Not much. I always appreciate being invited to your channel. Always a big honor for me to see Commander Macmillan and you.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the Shills. We will. We've dropped the link there, but we'll be dropping that again in just a minute to their channel. We'll be there tomorrow. That's Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern. So look forward to that. Thank you all for joining us again, and we look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, at a minimum, I guess sort of no news is good news. You did have an accident that killed some members of your government, and there's been an offensive, but it's not as bad as it was before the winter started, and things are unfortunately things are going to probably pick up again when the ground begins to be more amicable to war. But in the meantime, hopefully people are reasonably safe. You have power, and we hope that you stay safe and as comfortable as can be in the next week. And we look forward to seeing you 1 week from today, Operator Starsky.
Thank you so much.